The bottle was warm in her hands. It was a clumsy thing, fashioned from a treated goat bladder and a carved wooden nipple. But it worked. The milk, a formula of goat's milk and crushed herbs she'd spent days perfecting, was the only thing the pup would take. He was so small. A tiny, fragile life wrapped in the finest wool blankets, his fur the same silver gray as the winter sky outside. His eyes were closed, his little mouth working rhythmically, a soft suckling sound that was the only noise in the vast, quiet room. A log shifted in the hearth, sending a cascade of orange sparks up the stone chimney. The fire was the only source of light, casting long, dancing shadows that made the cavernous nursery feel both immense and intimate. Dagny watched the pup's chest rise and fall. Each breath was a victory. When she'd first been brought to him, his breaths had been shallow, hesitant things, as if he were considering letting go. Now they were steady, stronger. The pup's mouth went still. The rhythmic nursing stopped. A tiny, milk-drunk sigh escaped his lips, and his head lolled to the side, fast asleep. She smiled, a small, tired thing that barely touched her eyes. Carefully, she eased the bottle away and settled him more deeply into the crook of her arm. He was a warm, solid weight against her. A trust she had not earned, but had been given all the same. A feeling prickled at the back of her neck. She was not alone. She had not been alone for a long time. Her eyes lifted slowly from the sleeping pup to the far corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. A shape resolved itself from the darkness. A mountain in the form of a man, seated in a heavy throne-like chair that he dwarfed. The Alpha King. Edric. He did not move. He just sat there, watching them. His face was a mask of harsh plains and shadow, his eyes twin glints of silver in the gloom. He was always watching. She had learned to feel the weight of his gaze, a physical pressure on her skin. She didn't know how long he'd been there this time. An hour? 4? With him, time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing around his silent, immense stillness. He was the eye of a storm, and she and this tiny pup were huddled in the impossible calm at his center. His silence was a language she was slowly, painfully learning to translate. It was not the empty silence of absence. It was a dense, weighted thing, full of unspoken grief and a terrifying, desperate hope that was aimed squarely at her. He had been watching for hours, watching her save his son. Finally, he moved. The scrape of his chair on the stone floor was shockingly loud in the quiet. He rose to his full, intimidating height, a shadow stretching all the way to the hearth, and took a single step forward into the firelight. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Fear was an old, familiar coat, one she could never seem to shrug off. But this was a different fear. It wasn't the terror of a blow or a harsh word. It was the fear of the unknown, the fear of what this powerful, broken man wanted from her. "He is asleep," Edric said. His voice was like the grinding of glaciers, deep, rough, and cold enough to freeze the air. Dagny just nodded, her throat too tight for words. She clutched the pup a little closer. He took another step, and another, until he was standing over her. He smelled of pine and cold iron and the sharp, clean scent of a winter night. He loomed, a predator of impossible scale, yet his gaze was fixed entirely on the small bundle in her arms. For a long moment, he just looked. She saw the iron control in his jaw, the deep lines of exhaustion etched around his eyes. She saw the king, the warrior, the alpha of all alphas. And beneath it all, she saw a father terrified of losing the last piece of his world. His hand, large enough to crush her skull, lifted slowly. She flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement she instantly hated herself for. His hand froze in midair. His silver eyes flicked to hers, and for a fraction of a second, she saw something flicker in their depths. Hurt. Then it was gone, replaced by the familiar mask of cold control. He completed the motion, his fingers impossibly gentle as they brushed a stray piece of fur from the pup's cheek. The touch was so light, so tender, it made her own breath catch. The contrast was a physical shock. This man, who commanded armies and made rivals tremble, could touch his child with the delicacy of a falling snowflake. He let his hand rest on the pup's back, a warm, heavy weight. Through the blankets, she could feel the heat of him. "You have done well, Dagny," he said, the words low and rough. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and the weight of that gaze was enough to steal the air from her lungs. How? How had she done it? How had she succeeded where the best healers and wet nurses in the kingdom had failed? The answer felt like a lifetime away. 3 months earlier, the only life she was concerned with saving was her own. The forest was her sanctuary, and her prison. The northern wilderness was a harsh master but a fair one. It demanded strength, and it rewarded it with survival. It did not care about her past. The ancient pines did not whisper about the brand on her shoulder. The snow did not judge the scars on her back. She lived in a small, half-buried cabin she had repaired herself, miles from any trade road or settlement. She was a ghost, a rumor. The trappers from the south spoke of a wild woman who lived in the deep woods, but no one ever sought her out. The woods themselves kept them at bay. Dagny was a warrior, trained since she could walk to wield a blade, to track, to fight, to kill. Her body was a weapon her father had forged in cruelty and pain, but she had laid that weapon down. She hunted with a bow now, not for sport or glory, but for food. She moved through the forest not as a conqueror, but as a part of it, another shadow slipping between the trees. She was hiding from a world that had declared her a failure, a defective tool to be discarded. Her father's brand was a constant, itching reminder. Insubordinate. The word was scarred into her skin, a label she could never escape. That morning, she was tracking a buck. The snow was fresh, the tracks clear. She moved with an economy of motion, her worn leathers making no sound, her breath misting in the frigid air. The cold was a comfort. It made her feel clean. It froze the memories until they were brittle things she could almost shatter. A sound broke the stillness, not the snap of a twig under a hoof. It was the jingle of a harness, the grunt of a horse. Men. Instantly, she was gone. Not running, but melting. She flattened herself behind a snow-laden fir, her bow held low. Her heart, which had been beating with the slow, steady rhythm of the hunt, now pounded with a frantic, trapped terror. They were not supposed to be here. No one came this deep. She peered through the branches. There were 5 of them, all on massive war horses that steamed in the cold. They were dressed in dark gray cloaks, trimmed with silver wolf fur, the royal guard. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Her father. He had found her. After 2 years of peace, he had finally tracked her down. He'd sent the king's own men to drag her back. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. They would not take her. She would die here, in the quiet snow, before she ever let him put his hands on her again. One man dismounted. He was larger than the others, his presence so immense it seemed to suck the very air around him. He did not wear a helmet. His hair was the color of dark iron, threaded with silver, and his face was all harsh angles and brutal authority. Even from a distance, she could feel the power radiating from him like heat from a forge. It was him, the Alpha King. Why was he here? Why would the king himself come for a single runaway? It made no sense. He surveyed the woods, his silver eyes seeming to cut through the trees, through her hiding place, and straight into her soul. She held her breath, convinced he could hear the wild drumming of her heart. "Come out," he commanded. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried through the frozen forest with the weight of an avalanche. It was not a request. She stayed perfectly still, trying to will herself invisible. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness, and took a step toward her hiding place. Dagny. Her name. Hearing it from his lips was a physical blow. It shattered her anonymity, the careful walls she had built around herself. He knew her name. I have been looking for you. Panic clawed at her throat. She drew her knife, the worn leather of the hilt familiar and solid in her trembling hand. She could fight. She could take 2 of them, maybe 3, before they brought her down. It was a better death than the one her father had planned for her. She rose from her hiding place, a cornered wolf ready to sell its life dearly. The guards' hands went to their swords, but the king raised a single hand, stopping them. His eyes met hers. There was no anger in them, no judgment. There was only a deep, unsettling focus. He looked at her not as a prisoner, but as a destination, as if his entire journey had ended right here, in this patch of frozen ground. I mean you no harm, he said, his voice softer now, though no less commanding. Lies, she rasped, her own voice raw from disuse. A flicker of something. Surprise? Amusement? Crossed his face. I do not lie. He took another step. She raised her knife, the point aimed at his heart. Stay back. He stopped. He looked at the blade, then back at her face. He was close enough now that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He looked old. Not in years, but in sorrow. He looked like a man carrying the weight of 1,000 winters. My father sent you, she accused, the words tasting like ash. Your father does not command me, he stated simply. This has nothing to do with him. She didn't believe him. She couldn't afford to. Trust was a luxury for people who had never been betrayed. Then what do you want? She demanded. His gaze was intense, unwavering. It felt as though he were peeling back the layers of grime and fear, seeing the broken thing she kept hidden inside. I want you to come with me. No. It is not a request. They stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. The warrior she had been screamed at her to fight, to run, to die on her own terms. But the exhausted, lonely woman who lived in her skin was tired. So incredibly tired of fighting. And there was something else. In his eyes, she did not see the triumphant cruelty of her father's men. She saw desperation, a deep, gnawing need that he was trying and failing to conceal. He needed something from her. And for the first time in her life, someone needing her wasn't a threat. It was a question. Slowly, reluctantly, she lowered her knife. The king's fortress was a spike of black granite piercing the sky, a monument to power and cold. It was a place of stone and iron, softened only by the thick wolf pelts and tapestries that did little to keep the bone-deep chill at bay. Dagny felt like a stray dog brought in from the cold, still dripping snow on the fine carpets. The court stared. They saw her worn leathers, her wild hair, the dirt under her nails. They saw a nobody, a barbarian from the woods, and they whispered behind their hands. Their contempt was a familiar blanket. She wrapped it around herself and let it make her invisible. Edric ignored them all. He led her through the labyrinthine halls himself, his guards trailing behind like silent gray shadows. He did not speak, did not explain. He simply walked, and she followed, a captive on an invisible leash. He gave her rooms, not a cell, but a suite of chambers with a roaring fire, a soft bed, and a bath that steamed with blessed heat. Fine clothes were laid out, silks and wools in shades of gray and deep blue. It was more luxury than she had ever known, and it felt like a cage. She was a prisoner, no matter how gilded the bars. For days, she saw little of him. He was a phantom, a presence she felt in the castle's stones but rarely glimpsed. She heard the whispers of the servants who brought her food. The king was in his council chambers day and night. The northern clans were restless. A rival alpha from the west was making threats. The kingdom was on a knife's edge. She was a piece in a game she didn't understand, and it terrified her. Her solitude was broken on the 5th day, not by the king, but by a sound. A thin, reedy wail that cut through the thick stone walls. It was the sound of a baby crying, a weak, hopeless sound that spoke of pain. The sound drew her. She followed it out of her rooms and down a long, guarded corridor. The guards at the end of the hall moved to block her, but then they saw her face, and a flicker of uncertainty crossed their features. The king had given no orders regarding her movements within the keep. They let her pass. The crying led her to a heavy oak door. She pushed it open and stepped inside. It was a nursery, filled with the finest toys and a cradle carved from a single piece of white birch. But the room was cold, stagnant with an air of despair. A handful of frantic-looking women fluttered around the cradle, their faces pale with worry. And in the cradle was the source of the sound, the pup. He was tiny, his skin translucent, his breaths coming in ragged little gasps between cries. He was fading. She could see it. It was a look she'd seen in newborn fawns left by their mothers, a slow, quiet surrender to the encroaching dark. One of the women, a healer by her robes, tried to press a bottle of goat's milk to his lips. The pup turned his head away, his wail growing weaker, more desperate. "He will not take it," the healer murmured, her voice tight with fear. "He has taken nothing for 2 days." Dagny watched, her heart aching for the tiny, struggling creature. She knew this kind of fight, the fight to exist when the world wanted you to disappear. She stepped forward. "The milk is wrong," she said, her voice quiet but clear. The healer turned, her eyes wide with shock and offense. "Who are you to question my methods? This is the finest milk, from the healthiest stock." "It is too rich," Dagny said, her own knowledge surfacing, memories of her mother, a healer herself, before her father's cruelty had snuffed out her light. "His system cannot take it. It needs to be cut with water, and it needs fennel to soothe his stomach, and a touch of honey for strength." The healer scoffed. "Nonsense, old wives' tales." "My mother was a healer," Dagny said, a spark of defiance flaring in her chest. She knew these things. Before anyone could stop her, she moved to the small hearth where the milk was being kept warm. She found the herbs she needed in the healer's own satchel. With practiced hands, she mixed a new formula, her movements sure and steady. She did not think. She just did. It was a knowledge buried deep in her bones. She fashioned the clumsy bottle and brought it back to the cradle. The pup was barely crying now, his energy spent. "Let me," she whispered. The women parted, their skepticism warring with their desperation. Dagny gently lifted the pup from the cradle. He was lighter than air, a fragile collection of bones. She held him against her chest, murmuring soft, meaningless sounds, rocking him gently. She could feel the faint, fluttery beat of his heart against her own. She offered him the bottle. He turned his head away at first, but she persisted, gently stroking his cheek, letting a single drop of the warm, sweet milk touch his lips. His mouth twitched. He tasted it. Slowly, hesitantly, he latched on. The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft suckling of the pup. Dagny held her breath, her entire being focused on this one small miracle. He was drinking. He was fighting. A shadow fell over the cradle. She looked up and found King Edric standing there. He must have entered without a sound. His face was unreadable, but his silver eyes were fixed on the pup in her arms, a raw, naked emotion in them that made her own throat tighten. It was hope, a terrible, fragile thing. He looked from his son to her, and his expression was one of profound confusion, as if she were a puzzle he could not solve. From that day on, the nursery became her world. The pup, whom she learned was named Bram, was her sole responsibility. She slept in a chair by his cradle, waking every few hours to feed him. She held him, sang to him the old forest songs her mother had taught her, and slowly, painstakingly, coaxed him back from the brink. Edric was a constant, silent presence. He would appear at all hours, a ghost in his own home, and simply watch. He never spoke. He never interfered. He just stood in the shadows, his grief and hope a palpable force in the room. She began to see the cracks in his iron facade, the way his shoulders slumped when he thought no one was looking, the tremor in his hand when he reached out to touch his son's head, only to pull back at the last second, as if afraid his touch might break him. They were two lonely, broken people, orbiting the small, warm sun of this one fragile life. And in the quiet hours of the night, holding his son, Dagny began to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness, not yet, but a sense of purpose, a reason to exist beyond mere survival. She was healing the son, but she was also healing herself. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a war party. Their banner was that of the Stonefang Pack, a black wolf's head on a field of gray, her father's banner. Dagny was in the nursery with Bram when the horns blew. She saw them from the window, a column of armed riders led by a man whose presence made the very air feel thin and cold, Lord Valerius, her father. Ice flooded her veins. He had come for her. She snatched Bram from his cradle, holding him close. Her warrior instincts, long dormant, roared back to life. Find a weapon. Find an escape. Protect the child. The castle was in an uproar. Servants scurried. Guards ran to the battlements. But there was no battle. The gates were opened. Her father was being welcomed as an ally. She felt sick. Edric was allied with the monster she had run from. Hours later, a guard came for her. The king requests your presence in the great hall. The man's voice was grim. He would not meet her eyes. She knew what this was. A trade. Her life in exchange for an alliance. She had been a fool to think this was anything else. Clutching a sleeping Bram, she walked to the great hall like a woman walking to her own execution. The hall was packed with Edric's council and her father's warriors. The air was thick with tension. Edric sat on his massive stone throne, his face an unreadable mask of granite. At the foot of the throne stood her father. He was, as she remembered, tall, lean, with eyes the color of chips of ice. He looked at her, and his lip curled in a sneer of contempt. "So, the stray returns to the fold," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. He looked at the pup in her arms. "And it has learned to care for another's whelp. A pity it could never learn to obey its own sire." His eyes fell to the brand on her shoulder, visible where the simple tunic she wore dipped. "I see it carries my mark still. A reminder of its failure." Dagny stood her ground, her body a shield for Bram. She met her father's gaze, refusing to show the terror that was turning her bones to water. "King Edric," her father said, turning to the throne. "Our alliance is a valuable one. We need each other to hold back the Western Pacts, but my authority in my own lands must be absolute. This thing is mine. It defied me. It fled its duty. It must be made an example of. Return it to me." It. He always called her it. The council members murmured their agreement. She could hear their whispers. He's right. The alliance is too important. She is nothing. This was the choice. Her or the kingdom. An easy choice for a king. She looked at Edric, her heart a cold, dead stone in her chest. She expected to see resignation, regret perhaps, but acceptance. Instead, she saw a flicker of something she had never seen in him before. Rage. A cold, silent fury that made the very air crackle. He rose slowly from his throne. "She is not a thing, Valerius," Edric said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And she is not yours to command." A collective gasp went through the hall. Her father stared, his face a mask of disbelief. "What did you say?" "I said, Edric repeated, his voice dropping even lower, becoming the rumble of an earthquake before the ground splits open. That she is under my protection. She is not leaving this fortress. Not with you. Not ever. Her father's face contorted with fury. You would break our alliance for this branded Omega? This worthless scrap? I would break the world for her, Edric growled, the words torn from him raw and absolute. It was a confession, a declaration, and it was her death sentence. Her father laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Then you are a fool, and you will die like one. He drew his sword. His warriors followed suit. Chaos erupted, but Valerius was not interested in the guards. He moved toward her. If I cannot have it back, I will destroy it here. Edric lunged from the dais, but two of his own council members blocked his path, their faces pleading. Your Majesty, think of the kingdom. Her father was almost upon her. She had no weapon. She had a child in her arms. She backed away, her heel hitting the cold stone of the dais that held the throne. There was nowhere left to run. He grabbed her arm, his fingers like iron bands, digging into her flesh. Pain, sharp and familiar, shot up her arm. The old terror, the helplessness, it threatened to swallow her whole. Bram began to cry, awakened by the shouting. You will learn what it means to defy me, her father snarled, raising his hand to strike her. She flinched, turning to shield Bram with her body, her free hand flying back to brace herself against the throne. Her palm slapped against the ancient carved armrest, and the world went silent. A wave of power, hot as a forge blast, erupted from her hand. It was not a violent force. It was a deep, resonant hum, a pulse of pure life and warmth that filled the entire hall. The stone of the throne beneath her hand felt like it was singing, a deep, ancient song she somehow knew the words to. The brand on her shoulder burned with an unbearable heat. She cried out, not in pain, but in release. She felt the scarred letters twist and dissolve, the hateful word unwritten from her skin, leaving it smooth and clean. A soft golden light emanated from her, pushing back the cold shadows of the hall. The chill that always clung to the stones seemed to flee, replaced by a deep, abiding warmth. Her father was thrown back, not by a physical blow, but by the sheer sovereign presence of the power she had unleashed. He stumbled, his face a mask of shock and terror, his icy composure shattered. Everyone stared. Edric, his council, her father's men. They all stared at her. At the woman bathed in a soft golden light, holding the Alpha King's heir, her hand resting on the arm of the throne as if she had been born to sit there. She looked down at her own hands, at the faint light that seemed to pulse just beneath her skin. The fear was gone, the self-loathing, the feeling of worthlessness. It was all burned away by this clean, fierce heat. She was not a weapon. She was not a failure. She was something else entirely. And now, hours later, the castle was quiet again. Her father and his men were in the dungeons. The council was locked in their chambers, reeling. The world had shifted on its axis. She sat in the nursery, the sleeping pup in her arms, trying to understand the fire that now hummed peacefully in her veins. Edric took that final step, his words echoing in the silent room. How? She looked up at him, her eyes clear for the first time. I don't know. He knelt before her, the great Alpha King on his knees. It was a gesture of such profound submission, of such shocking vulnerability, it took her breath away. He was not kneeling to a servant or a runaway. He was kneeling before an equal. They said you were a weapon, he said, his voice thick with emotion. A failed one. Your father tried to breed a line of warriors with the old magic in their blood. He thought you were a dud, a line that had run dry. She stared at him. Old magic. The words meant nothing and everything. He was wrong, Edric continued, his silver eyes burning with an intensity that seared her to the soul. You are not a weapon. You are a queen. He reached out, not for his son this time, but for her. His fingers gently cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. His touch was warm. For the first time since she had met him, he was warm. The cold that had clung to him like a shroud was gone, banished by the light she had unleashed. "My line is of the stone," he whispered. The words a confession meant only for her. "Tied to the cold of the mountains. It gives us strength, but it leeches the life from us. Every generation grows colder, more distant. My mate." She froze. The cold took her when Bram was born, and it was taking him too. Tears welled in her eyes. The pieces clicked into place. His desperation, his search for her. "Your line is of the fire," he said, "the heart fire of this land. My ancestors stole the throne from yours 1,000 years ago, creating an imbalance. The land is dying, Edric. The winters grow longer. The life fades. I knew I had to find you, the last of the sun-touched line. I thought I was looking for a cure, a tool. I did not know I was looking for my other half." The mutual rescue. It laid itself bare between them. She had saved his son. He had saved her from her father. But it was more than that. Her warmth was saving his line. His strength was giving her a place to finally use her own. "I am politically trapped," he admitted, his voice raw. "The council will see you as a threat. The other alphas will see you as a prize. They will try to take you from me." She looked down at the sleeping pup, then back at the king kneeling before her. The warrior she had been, and the queen she was becoming, merged into one. The fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, unyielding certainty. "I know," she said. "Then we will break the trap." A tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his harsh cheek. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her lips. "I love you, Dagny," he breathed, the words a surrender and a vow. "I think I have from the moment I saw you standing in the snow, ready to fight the world." She closed her eyes, a single tear of her own slipping free. "I know," she whispered back, and it was not an answer. It was an acceptance, a promise. 6 months later, Dagny stood on the high balcony of the great tower, looking out over the lands. It was spring. A real spring, not the hesitant, fearful thaw of years past, but a riot of green life bursting from the soil. The land was healing. Behind her, she heard the sound of laughter. She turned, a real smile gracing her lips, one that reached her eyes and made them shine. Edric was on the floor, on his hands and knees, a mock growl rumbling in his chest. Bram, now a sturdy toddler with a shock of silver hair and his mother's warm, bright eyes, shrieked with delight and launched himself onto his father's back. The cold, silent king was gone. In his place was a husband and a father, his laughter echoing in the sun-filled room. The political traps had been broken, not by war, but by life. Her power, combined with his, had brought a new prosperity to the kingdom. The harvest was bountiful, the people were hopeful. The rival alphas had seen the truth of their combined strength and had bent the knee, not in fear, but in awe. Her father was exiled, stripped of his titles, a bitter, powerless man left to rage at the uncaring wilderness. The council members who had opposed her were replaced by those who saw the wisdom of balance. Edric looked up at her, his eyes full of a love so profound it still sometimes stole her breath away. He rose, scooping Bram into his arms, and came to stand beside her at the railing. "Look, Bram," he murmured, pointing out at the green valley. "All of this, it's breathing again. Because of your mother." Dagny leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand coming to rest on his chest, over his heart. It beat strong and steady beneath her palm. Warm. She was no longer the runaway, the branded failure, the ghost in the woods. She was Dagny, the sun-touched queen. She was a wife, a mother. She was home. Bram reached for her, his small, chubby hands making grasping motions. She took him from Edric, settling him on her hip. He smelled of milk and sunshine. He was the future. Their future. "What are you thinking?" Edric asked, his arm wrapping around her, pulling them both into his strength. She looked out at the horizon, at the endless expanse of mountains and forests, a kingdom reborn. "I'm thinking," she said, her voice soft but sure, "that this is just the beginning." He kissed the top of her head, his love a warm, protective shield. Together they watched the sun set on their new world, a world they had not conquered, but healed, together.